So if you are lucky enough to actually find love without doing the DNA test, congratulations. You're basically settled for a knockoff soulmate, and you're probably never ever going to be 100% content or sure that the person you're with is the one for you. So what if you live in a world where you can do a DNA test and it will tell you exactly who your soulmate is and who you can actually be with for the rest of your life? Does that mean now there is no more first bad dates? You don't have to go around on apps and swipe left or right for your perfect person, or maybe go to seedy little bars where you're waiting to see if you can pick up someone that might potentially be the one for you? Maybe this sounds like a dream, or maybe it sounds like a nightmare. Well, in John Marv's sci-fi thriller, The One, that dream becomes a global reality, and it quickly mutates into a bit of a psychological nightmare for 5 lives that are mentioned and you follow in this book, and their world gets turned around simply by taking this one test. This premise of the story is actually very interesting and quite brilliant. It is very much like a Black Mirror episode. If you are into that sort of show, you would, I think, find this quite enjoyable to read about. In this world, this dystopian world, there is scientists that have discovered a gene that matches you with the one person on Earth, and you are genetically destined to be together, or to at least fall in love with them. You might not necessarily want to be together with them, but you at least know that there is someone out there that has this strand of DNA that matches you perfectly. In this book, there is a company called Match Your DNA, and it explodes overnight and has become a sensation in the world. Millions of people have now taken the test. Even people that were already in couples took the test and realized that their person that they're with is not the one, and they end up breaking up. Marriages shatter after many, many years of being together. And the world completely reshapes itself around the idea of finding the one. But what happens if the person you are matched with actually turns your life into a living hell? What if that soulmate of yours is not so perfect and holds some dark, deadly secrets? Or worse, what if your soulmate is actually a serial killer? Welcome to Twist, the whole insane story told. So before I jump into this full recap, I'm going to address something, because I know at least one person might say in the comments or realize that this book was actually turned into a Netflix show. Yes, correct. The One by John Marrs was adapted into a Netflix series where there's, I think, 8 episodes and just 1 season. However, I cannot stress this enough that the show is almost nothing like the book, because I tried to watch it instead of actually reading the book and thought I could get answers, but I didn't. So when I say it's nothing like book, I don't mean they changed a few details or combined a couple of characters here and there. I mean they took the basic premises of this DNA testing existing in a world that is very much like our own, that you can identify your soulmates, and then sort of went off completely in a different direction where the characters were different. The person that was the CEO of the company is also very much different, and there's a different scandal and mystery to it than it is in this book alone. So you can almost watch the show and it won't spoil you on the book very much at all. The characters compared to the series and the book are completely different. The storylines are different. The mysteries are also different. And I think the tone is quite different. Some characters from the book don't even exist in the same way. And the major plot points are either heavily altered or completely invented just for the show alone. So if you've watched the Netflix series and you think you know what's going to happen in this book, I would say you don't, because I didn't. Honestly, the two feel like distant cousins who happen to inherit the same DNA premise, and they never speak to each other again or never converse at all. I guess in some ways that is very good, because you can go into this recap completely blind. Even if you've watched the series, this story still has plenty of surprises to come. Now that that's cleared up, let's get into the absolute chaos that unfolds when people discover that scientists may have just ruined their dating lives forever and ever. I'm going to dive headfirst into the story as an entirety, and then I'm going to dissect it piece by piece, because it's actually easier to tell you about the many lives of this story. So in the book, you are following 5 separate POVs, 5 people whose lives are completely derailed by one seemingly harmless DNA test on Match Your DNA. In this world, taking the test isn't mandatory, so you can choose not to do it at all. No one's going to force you to put your DNA into a test tube and let scientists try to play matchmaker for you at all. But society has made it quite attractive for you to actually take the test. If you're matched with the soulmate, known as the one, you'll actually get some tax benefits. And who doesn't want that in a time where cost of living is high up and you can get more money in your pocket? So obviously it's incentivized. There's systemic laws put in place for you to actually want to take this test a little bit more. And also, if you take this test and it turns out that your soulmate, the one, lives in another country, immigration actually becomes a lot faster and significantly easier. The system is set up to incentivize you to chase your DNA soulmate. And of course, then apart from the systemic law put in place to sort of encourage you to take this test, there is the also benefit from a societal aspect. Couples who are together because they were matched on the DNA site and they have actually found the one have just almost develop this elite mentality that they are in a better couple, or they're a better couple than you as someone who hasn't taken the test whatsoever. So if you are lucky enough to actually find love without doing the DNA test, congratulations. But according to these other people that are in couples that have been matched, you're basically settled for a knockoff soulmate, and you're probably never ever going to be 100% content or sure that the person you're with is the one for you. This book is very good at pacing, and I think John Mars is quite good at writing that way. And although this book does tackle a lot of really dark matters, heavy subject matters, the sheer momentum of the twist keeps you completely glued to your book and it will just keep you going. But fair warning, we are diving straight into heavy plot mechanisms and major endings now. So if you do want to read this book and find out all the twists and turns yourself, this is your official spoiler alert warning, and you can obviously exit out of the video and then come see me and we can talk about it after you have read the book yourself. But before I get into this whole madness of the book, if you love deep dives, recaps that don't hold anything back, make sure you like, if I can get you to do that, and also subscribe to my channel, and of course turn on the notification bell so that you never miss a twist recap in the future. All right, so let's start with the plot breakdown and all the character arcs. The book, as I said, is structured through 5 different perspectives. So each chapter goes into another perspective. So I'm going to break down each perspectives from matching with the one, interacting with their better half, and how their fairy tale turns into horror one by one. So that is one continuous story and I'm not jumping around for you. And obviously the stories, I'm going to start with sort of the milder stories maybe, and then end up on the most heavier ones that actually brings all the stories together. So I'm going to start with character 1, which is Mandy, the twisted legacy, let's call this story. Mandy is a lonely woman who is desperate to find her soulmate and have her own family. She meets a man the old-fashioned way. She marries him. He wasn't a DNA match for her, but then that's okay. They are still trying to have a baby together. But one thing leads to another, and that doesn't eventuate, and there's a lot of trouble with her conceiving or actually going full term with the baby. And that puts a lot of strain on the marriage and it ends up breaking up. So at this point in time when we meet her, she is divorced and she's lonely, and everybody around her seems to be happily married and having their own children, and she's feeling like she needs desperately now to find the one. Also, it turns out Sean, the guy that she was with before, who she was married to, secretly went and took this DNA test and found out his match was a woman 11 years older than her, and decided that he would rather be with her and continue his journey that way than stay and try with Mandy. So she's obviously left with that shock as well, which is not great. So she's now at this stage 37 and she's going to have to start all over again. Mandy's got 3 sisters. They're all happily married to their DNA matches, and she's feeling like she's that spinster that has been left on the shelf and she doesn't want to be that way. So obviously she goes and takes the DNA test herself, obviously encouraged by her sisters, and she does get a match, which is great. So I do have to say, like, just because you put yourself into this test, it doesn't guarantee that you're actually going to find your match. For instance, if I put myself into the DNA test and the person that's going to be my soulmate that has the same genetic makeup as me decides not to go into this test, then ultimately I'll never find them because they don't have their DNA on the server. So it works out that way. Or what happens if you're matched with someone in a country where it's not as technically sort of sound, or they're not in a great financial position as you, and they can't afford to put the test, you will also not find out that you're matched with them. So you can go really your entire life without finding matches at all. So to find a match is like, you know, winning the lottery maybe, or winning bingo, where it doesn't always happen. So if it does happen for you, you are quite happy about it. So Mandy is matched with a personal trainer named Richard, who is younger than her, but age is not that important. It's just a number to her. She doesn't care. She is definitely over the moon about this situation until she discovers that her perfect guy, Richard, tragically has passed away just weeks before. Talk about a terrible timing and a bit of bad luck for our Mandy. She's devastated. She's devastated, obviously, about this news, but rather than moving on with her life and trying to find a match that maybe not be your DNA match, but still could be a great fella, she decides to go to his memorial service. Mandy goes to the memorial service and instantly bonds with the family. She meets Richard's mother, Pat, and his sister, Chloe. They obviously tell her how incredible Richard was when he was alive. He was an amazing man and he would have loved her and treated her so well. And they welcome her into the family with open arms. And pretty soon Mandy's feeling closer to them than to her actual family, which is a little bit of a worry, I would say, a little bit of a red flag situation here. Because it's a little bit weird, isn't it, to become best friends with a dead matched family? Yes, it is, because Mandy even starts lying to her own family, pretending that she actually met up with Richard and is dating him, even though, did we not forget that he's 6 feet under and no longer alive? But Mandy feels a little bit embarrassed about the situation, maybe even going to the memorial service herself. So she continues on with this facade and, makes up all these excuses of why they can't meet Richard at this point in time. But then things go from a little weird to completely unhinged really quickly. Richard's mother casually just mentions that they have access to some of his frozen swimmers. And hey, if Mandy wants to use her DNA match to become a mother finally, then the option is there for her now. And so at this point, as a person that's just observing the situation, you're probably thinking, no, that's just goofy. Don't do that. That is definitely a massive red flag at this point. And for the mother to suggest it to you as well, is that not also a little bit peculiar and out of this world? So obviously don't take this option and tie yourself to this family, because I think there's something unusual happening here. Mandy is different to us because she says yes. She undergoes IVF, gets pregnant, and moves right into Richard's old bedroom in his mother's house. Fantastic. Now, while Mandy is now heavily pregnant, she suddenly decides that she needs to find a little bit more about Richard and starts snooping around in his room. My thing is, Mandy, this is something you should have probably done before you said yes to the IVF and getting pregnant by this guy, but whatever. She decides to do it after. And so she does start uncovering a few things that do not match the persona that his family has presented to her and painted. To put it bluntly, this boy was an absolute F-boy. A personal trainer who is a serial womanizer, not a shocking concept, and that is exactly what Richard was when he was alive. Mandy tracks down one of his exes named Michelle, and she spills the tea. And it is quite disturbing. Michelle reveals that Richard was purely about hookups, traveling, and adventure, and that's all he wanted. He explicitly told her ages ago that he would never take this DNA test because it ruined the thrill of the chase. And he absolutely hates kids, so he wouldn't even want them anyway. Mandy is totally confused by this because she was told by Pat and Chloe that he was desperate to find the one and desperate to start a family, which is why he stored his samples in the first place. But when Mandy mentions the mother and the sister to Michelle, Michelle's eyes get suddenly really wide and she looks a bit shocked and pale. Because in her expert opinion that these two women are absolute freaks. And I'm about to tell you why. It turns out that weeks after Richard's accident, Pat and Chloe approached Michelle with the exact same offer. They practically harassed her to get her to use the sample and get her impregnated, even offering to pay for her bills and treat her pretty much like a surrogate, until Michelle literally threatened to call the police on them, and then that's the only time they started to back off. And if you think that's messed up, brace yourself, because we find out that Richard is not even dead. He is alive, but in a vegetative state at a private nursing home with severe brain damage. His family doesn't even visit him and basically acts like he's already gone and doesn't exist anymore. And the truth is, Mandy was just completely manipulated by the mother and sister. After the accident, Chloe and Pat illegally submitted Richard's DNA sample to match your DNA because they wanted a replacement guy or a replacement boy for him, which explains why Pat was so aggressively obsessed with the baby being a baby boy, because she kept going to Mandy, I know it's a boy, I want a boy, I bet you it's a boy. When Mandy realizes that she's actually trapped herself into a real life thriller, she tries to flee, but Pat physically stops her, and they're fighting on a staircase in Pat's house, and Mandy falls down the stairs and she blacks out. The next moment she wakes up and she's in the hospital, and her baby bump is gone, which means the baby's no longer there. She has had an emergency C-section, but the nurse tells her not to worry because her mother-in-law is already taking really good care of the baby boy. Translation, the baby has pretty much been kidnapped by the family. From here, John Mars just fires twist after twist at us, and it just unravels really, really quickly. Mandy, though, is obviously going to try her best to look for the boy. She calls the police, and somewhere along the line, she remembers that there was an old photo of Richard as a baby at a specific holiday cottage with the family, and she realized this is probably exactly where Pat has taken her newborn baby, and she goes after them. So when they arrive at the cottage, Mandy was completely right. Pat is there, and there's a confrontation. In this confrontation, Pat ends up unaliving herself, and Mandy does get her baby back. But wait, there is a little bit more of the final twist here. It turns out Pat taking babies is not her first rodeo. Richard and Chloe weren't even her biological children. She has literally stolen them when they were toddlers, ages and ages ago. Pat had a history of psychological episodes triggered by multiple pregnancy losses, and she replaced her grief by kidnapping random kids to replace the ones that she didn't have, as opposed to getting help for herself. Honestly, the writing here is so good because Mars actually made me feel bizarrely a little bit sympathetic for Pat by the end of it. But like I said, she didn't need a baby. What Pat needed was some psychological help to get her through her, obviously, losses of her own babies. But luckily, this is a happy ending for Mandy because she does get her baby boy. She gets the baby that she always wanted. She survived. She got out of this alive, even though it was a bit of a horror ending to get here. But at the end of her story, she at least gets to walk away happy and safe with her baby. All right, so let's jump over to the next story, who is Christopher. Christopher's story is, we're going to dub the serial killer match. You would think this story is the most craziest of them all, but actually it's not, and you'll see why later. Christopher is a sociopath. He's a cold, calculated serial killer who targets women. He takes the test purely out of curiosity and matches with a woman named Amy. So even serial killers are taking these DNA tests. Anybody can take it as long as you've got the money to do so. Because he's a sociopath, he watches YouTube videos before he goes on a date with Amy to work out how to properly behave and wants to gain the upper hand, and he chooses to arrive late on their date so that it's like a power move to put Amy off sight and all that stuff. But Amy's quite sweet and completely oblivious to the monster that's sitting across from her, even though she is a police officer. So this is a very interesting match right off the bat. Suddenly, the fact that he's dating a police officer makes things more interesting for Christopher in his mind. He thought it was a hilarious irony for a woman sitting opposite him to be matched with a man who the Sun newspaper has branded British most evil killer, which he's chuffed about because that's the whole point. You know, as a serial killer, he wants to be remembered and deemed to be so clever. He wanted to know how the investigation of his case is going. So obviously he continues dating Amy because he's like, ha ha ha, how funny, I am going to outwit this woman that is pretty much looking into my case. And it's a huge ego boost and it feeds his ego even more. But this genetic match is really quite strong of a feeling that he obtains. He does fall genuinely in love with Amy. For the first time in his life, his urge to kill vanishes and Amy is bringing out the humanity in him, he thinks. So, all right, let's talk about Christopher. Honestly, for a story about a serial killer, this was probably the least thrilling plotline for me out of all the 5 stories. Don't get me wrong, the premise was incredibly dark and the stuff he does is morbid, but it just wasn't that surprising at the end of the day. See, Christopher is an aspiring, legendary serial killer. He wants to leave a legacy like people like Ted Bundy or Jack the Ripper, and he wants to hit a very nice number of women that he's unalive, and he's set that number at a goal of 30. And then he'll just retire and continue living a normal life now that he's fallen in love with Amy, and maybe even have some babies with her and live happily ever after is what he's thinking in his head. Maybe take up gardening and, go traveling, and that's what he wants. He generally thinks he can wrap everything up in this very perfect, idyllic way and just live a normal life. But of course, this is a psychological thriller, so he doesn't get away with it, which is the right, I think, plot ending for his story at the end of the day. Like your textbook serial killers, Christopher loves keeping trophies from his crime scenes, including Polaroid pictures. And where does he keep them? He keeps them stored in plain sight around his house and apartment. Genius? Genius move? I don't think so, because inevitably, Amy, who spends a lot of time in his house, stumbles upon his little collection, uncovers his dark secret, and instead of calling police because she was embarrassed that they might think, wow, you are a police officer and you're dating the serial killer and you didn't even know, how could you? She decides, though, to take the matter into her own hand, and she secretly tracks him down to his final showdown, his kill number 30. But before Christopher can even touch his final victim, he gets zapped by, I think, a taser. Amy hits him in the neck with it and he becomes unconscious, and he's forced to finally face his soulmate in what he's done. Amy at this point realizes a really grim truth. Sure, Christopher might stop killing for now because he loves her, he thinks, but that urge eventually will come back and she can't have that on her conscience and she can't risk that really. So she ends it right there. She unalives him using his own signature weapon, which is a cheese wire across the throat. And congratulations to Christopher, because he actually did reach his goal of 30 victims, except the only catch is he becomes number 30. To cover her tracks, Amy frames the scene to make it look like Christopher was just another victim of the anonymous killer, ensuring the real predator remains a mystery, which is exactly what Christopher wanted in the first place, to unalive all these people and to get away with murder. And to give her dead soulmate one final parting gift, she decides to subtly suggest to the police force that the nickname for this serial killer is the Saint Christopher Killer because of the religious symbol he always left behind at the crime scene, and he always wanted a memorable nickname for himself. Our next story is about a guy named Nick, which I'm going to title The Hidden Betrayal, because buckle up, Nick's storyline is an absolutely wild ride. It's easily one of my favorite ones in the entire book, and the twist at the end is genuinely jaw-dropping, and there's a lot of twists and turns to be had. When we are introduced to Nick at the start of his story, he is happily engaged to this wonderful woman named Sally. But they have these incredibly annoying, nosy friends named Samira and Deepak. And one night, as the couples are having a dinner together, Samira starts aggressively pushing Nick and Sally to take the Match Your DNA test. Why? Because Samira and Deepak claim they are the perfect DNA match, and as we already established earlier on, match couples in this world are notoriously smug and superior to everybody else, and they want to make sure that, we're matched. You should make sure you're matched. Otherwise, just in case your one is still out there and you're making a really bad decision and this is going to end up, in divorce courts later on. Now, personal opinion, I think you can love whoever you want. There is no law in place that says you have to go take this lab test and make sure that you're matching with the right person before you say I do. Now, because Samira has put this in her mind, Sally gets majorly insecure about it and forces Nick to take the test just to prove that they are each other's the one, to be sure, before they walk down the aisle together. The results come back and, surprise or predictable, Nick does not match with Sally. Now, like I said, just because you took this test doesn't mean you automatically will get a match, because your person might not have put their DNA into the company's website and therefore you don't know. And that happens for Sally. Sally doesn't get a match at all, which is quite common. But Nick, he does get a match. And his match is a guy named Alexander, or Alex. Now, we find out Nick has always identified as a straight man, but the psychological weight of this test is no joke, because when you get told that your matchmate is, a man or a person of the same gender to you, maybe you start to question your life choices, or what you have always thought one way maybe is not the truth now, right? He's like, you know what? It might say that, but I love you, Sally, and I don't care. I still want to marry you, and I'm fine with things as they are. But Sally goes and does her own thing and tracks down Alex for Nick. Turns out Alex is a physiotherapist, and she books an appointment for Nick to go, get his neck massage or something like that, just to see if there's chemistry or if they get that first instant attraction when you meet the one, which does happen. At first, when Nick walks in and sees Alex, he can acknowledge that Alex is probably a fit, good-looking guy, but there's nothing. There's no spark. There's no zazazoo. It's just a man meeting another man who's going to give him some physiotherapy. But as Nick walks out the door and turns around and makes eye contact with Alex, then boom, there's this just euphoric feeling that he gets. The spark is undeniable. Alex feels it too, which is complicated because Alex has a girlfriend and he's about to move back to his own country, which is New Zealand, where he came from, to care for his sick dad. So he's not going to be in the UK for very long. But the pull is too strong. Nick and Alex start seeing each other, just initially just talking, just befriending each other. And one thing leads to another and feelings start to develop. So Nick leaves Sally, jumps head first into his match and starts exploring his new sexuality. We fast forward a period. Nick is fully committed to his new life. He quits his job in the UK, packs up his bag, and he's ready to fly all the way to New Zealand to now be with Alex and hopefully have a happy ending. But then Sally calls him up and drops a bombshell. And the thing is, Sally is pregnant with a baby. Oh, obviously pregnant with a baby. What else would she be pregnant with? And she doesn't want to do this alone, nor does she want to get rid of the baby, and neither does Nick. So because Nick is genuinely a really good guy, he does the right thing. He gives up on his dream with Alex, returns to Sally, and moves into a separate bedroom where they sort of just become roommates, and he stays out of obligation rather than any feelings that he might still have. Then tragedy strikes because during childbirth, there are some major complications and Sally passes away, suddenly leaving Nick as a grieving partner and also now a single dad. Now, if you think that's already the twist and it's looking really bleak, oh, stick around, my friends, because that is just the start of the twist of the story. Up until now, I haven't really mentioned what Nick or Sally look like, right? On purpose. I haven't mentioned their race because it usually doesn't matter in the story. It is just a story that I can apply to any person of any shape, color, etc. But in this specific case, skin tone and race is everything. Nick and Sally are both Caucasian, pasty, and white. But when Nick looks at his newborn baby boy, he notices that the baby's hair and skin are very dark. Guess who else has very dark skin? Deepak. Hence why I think John Mars obviously named their besties with more ethnic names that you could easily identify in the twist, and they would reveal the skin tone of the baby, that you automatically will be like, well, who else in this story do you know that may be ethnically a bit more diverse than Nick and Sally? That's right, Nick's best friend, the guy who is supposedly happy married to his DNA match, Samara. Like I said, here's the thing with this book. Just because you are matched with your soulmate, with the one, it doesn't mean that the one is automatically a good person. We saw it with Christopher, who was a serial killer who also got a match. And we see it here with Deepak. He's a serial cheater. He's been complaining to Nick that his rompy-pompy life, his spice in his life, has deteriorated and is no longer existing since his wife has had the twin girls. And he thinks he needs to jump back onto Tinder to get his, kicks in life, which is disturbing already. Now, Nick overlooked this trait in his friend because, he thinks, we're just friends. It doesn't affect me at all, right? Wrong, because Sally and Deepak have been sleeping together behind his back all this time. It turns out at the end of the day that Sally was actually Deepak's true DNA match. Deepak and his wife, Samara, had totally lied about being matched because Samara was too embarrassed to admit to society that she was not with her one, even though she put so much pressure on them to do it, which I guess that's why she did it. She wanted another couple that she was with to be matched so that she felt better about being in a marriage where she wasn't matched with the person that she's married to. And this is where there's all this struggle of who cares? Who cares what a test says? But let's get back to what Sally's intentions were. The whole plan was for Sally to leave Nick and Deepak to leave Samara. But then Samara got pregnant with twins and Deepak panicked, came to his senses and dumped Sally, leaving Sally to run back to Nick and pretend everything was a-okay. What an absolute gem these two people are. But when Sally found out that she was pregnant, she had no idea which man was the father because at that time, obviously, she was sleeping with both of them. So she just used Nick as the safety net so she wouldn't be alone going through this all by herself. And why did she push Nick to take the DNA test in the first place? Well, it's because back then she was planning to leave him for Deepak and wanted to give Nick an out of the relationship with his own match so she wouldn't look like the bad person, right? The manipulation of this woman and Deepak is off the charts. To make matters worse though, Deepak absolutely wants nothing to do with the baby, because he's got his own life with his own two daughters and he just wants to walk away from this whole entire mess. But luckily, our guy Nick is adorable and very loving, has already fallen in love with his little baby who he's named Dylan, and decides to be the adult in the room and take responsibility and now accepts that he is now a single father. But it's okay because Nick does get his happily ever after. He still packs up his bag now, but now he packs up also baby Dylan's bag and he flies all the way to New Zealand and surprises Alex with baby in tow. He tells Alex him and the baby now are a package deal. Alex looks at them and welcomes them both with open arms, and that is where the story ends. John Mars leaves the rest of it to our imagination, and because I love Nick and this story, in my head they are absolutely happy together and living their life in New Zealand, which is great. All right, so we come to our fourth story, which is Jade, which I'm going to name The Protection Trap. This is our second last story following Jade, and I'm not going to lie, this was probably the most emotional plot line for me in the entire book, and it broke my heart in a few places and got me a little bit teary. Jade is a regular woman who gets matched with a guy named Kevin. The only tiny obstacle is that our Kevin here is not in the UK. No, he's all the way in Australia on a farm. I'm in Australia, but I'm not on a farm. But, at least there's that connection there. For 7 months, Jade and Kevin are texting, emailing, and just talking on the phone every day and getting to know each other and obviously falling for each other. The feelings are growing quite fast, but there's one weird thing that happens. There is no FaceTime. There is no Skype. Apparently, Kevin doesn't own a laptop or a smartphone, which, in any other context, you think this is a massive red flag, very catfish sort of vibes here, right? But Jade figures, hey, maybe he's just from a small backwood town in Australia. Thank you very much. Which happens, some of our regional areas in Australia does have really bad internet coverage and all that. So it could be true, but I gotta say, majority of Australia is now quite, in the new era where we can Skype and FaceTime time and all that stuff. So still be warned that this is a red flag. Jade herself is quite a lone wolf in the UK. She hates her job. So there's absolutely nothing keeping her in England. She decides to bite the bullet, max out her credit card, and flies across the world to surprise Kevin. She arrives at the farm feeling really excited. She gives him a call and be like, surprise, I'm here. I'm like right outside. And Kevin's response is, you shouldn't have come here, and just hangs up on her. At this point, you're thinking, okay, it is like a catfish situation. Maybe this man is already married and he has a secret wife or a secret family already. Or maybe he's just like an 80-year-old man living in a retirement home that's just trying to chat to a young girl. Who knows? It could be any of those things. But the reality is much more heartbreaking. Kevin has terminal cancer and only has 1 or 2 months left to live. The photos he sent Jade were from before he got sick and he was looking quite healthy, but now he's looking like he's someone that is terminally ill. But because Jade is a lovely human being, she decides to stay anyway and get to know him. And then she stays on the farm with Kevin, his brother, and his parents, which is quite a lovely thing. Kevin's family, his parents are Dan and Susan, and he has his supportive brother named Mark. They welcome Jade with open arms. Everything seems like it's working out, except for one glaring issue. Jade doesn't feel a single spark for Kevin. Now, the book does mention that in 92% of cases where you see your DNA match, you will feel this instant chemistry. But there is obviously that 8% that don't, and it takes a little bit more time to develop it. So Jade just assumes that she's part of that 8% and she's just going to wait it out and see what happens eventually. But the feelings from Kevin never actually eventuates. Instead, though, they do start developing for his brother Mark. And yikes, that's a little bit awkward. Jade knows that this is wrong, so she aggressively pushes her feelings down and just focuses all her attention on Kevin. When Kevin's health takes a sudden turn for the worse, his final wish before he goes was to marry her, and to give him peace, she says yes, and they do get married. It's a very incredibly selfless thing to do for Jade, and it's quite beautiful of her to do it at the end. Just 15 days after she says I do to Kevin, Kevin passes away. Jade stays by his side until the very last second, just chatting about nothing in particular because she refuses to let him pass away in silence. Because Kevin has actually become her best friend, and honestly reading this part was just really devastatingly sad, but incredibly sweet at the same time. A fortnight after the funeral, Jade is making plans to do a road trip around Australia for 5 weeks with Kevin's old 4x4 before heading back to England. But since the funeral, Mark has been completely ignoring her this whole time. Fed up with this rudeness, Jade finally goes to confront him and be like, well, what the hell is going on, man? And instead of having an argument with Mark, Mark just grabs her and kisses her. One thing leads to another and they hook up and they do it. In true chaotic fashion, the mum, Kevin's mum and Mark's mum, finds them in the aftermath and knows exactly what has happened. Susan is understandably not thrilled to see that her new grieving daughter-in-law is moving on so quickly with her other son just 2 weeks later. Then John Mars hits us with the twist. It turns out that Mark was the real DNA match for Jade all this time. Mark had intercepted the results and swapped his identity with Kevin's, leading everyone to believe that Kevin was the match. And why? Because Kevin was passing away and Mark wanted his brother to feel the comfort of knowing who his soulmate was before he passed, because that was his wish. Of course, and rightly so, initially Jade is furious and honestly doesn't want anything to do with Mark at this point in time. Because she has spent months drowning in guilt, thinking that she was a horrible person for craving her husband's brother, when the test had actually been screaming Mark's name the entire time. But after the temper had cooled and some wise words come out of Mama Susan, Jade forgives Mark and they end up together. And Mark joins her on her road trip across Australia. Once again, Mars leaves the ultimate ending up to our imaginations of what happens to this couple. But since this story put me through the emotional range, I'm going to choose that they're absolutely happy together living on this farm in the great outback. And now let's move on to our final story, which is Ellie, the dark side of power, we are going to name it. And friends, this is the grand finale that ties the entire book together because there is some unraveling that comes out that affects everyone in this whole entire world. Everything here that happens will completely shatter the rest of the plots and forces you to ask the ultimate question. Is this DNA test a miracle? Or is it just a curse on society and we don't need it? Ellie is a high-powered, ultra-wealthy businesswoman. She wears Miu Miu, carries designer bags, and is far too busy running the world to care about love. But then she gets an email alert. She's been matched, and this isn't just any regular customer. Ellie is the CEO and the founder of Match Your DNA. So the company that everybody else has been using, this is Ellie's story, and she is got to match herself. She's the most powerful woman probably at this point in time in this world, and she firmly believes in her own product, which is why she used it. Her match, though, is a low-key, totally ordinary computer engineer named Tim. He's got receding hairline, an average build, and a beard. He is not her usual type, but since scientist says that he is the match and the one, Ellie is going to give it a go. And honestly, it does work out. Ellie's cold-hearted exterior completely thaws. She falls head over heels for Tim, takes him home to meet her parents even, and when he pops the question, she happily says yes. So all is dandy. Never judge a book by its cover, right guys? Or should you? But then this book turns into a corporate thriller novel, and that vibe kicks in. One of Ellie's employees mentions that Tim looks exactly like a guy named Matthew, who they interviewed for a job at the company a while back. Is this a coincidence? Possibly. But then Ellie notices Tim is super sketchy about his past. He refuses to share photos of his family and talk about his mum very much. Even though Ellie has shared a lot about her family to him, he hasn't reciprocated that situation back. So Ellie goes snooping, which rightly so, I probably would as well if you're dating someone that's being a little bit sketchy. And she finds a photo of his mother and her jaw drops. Her mother's name was Samantha Ward. Years ago, Samantha was part of the secret group Ellie called the Seedlings. Back then, when Ellie was desperate to launch this company, she basically bent the rules and tested her DNA theories on these employees without their consent and knowledge. Ellie now realizes Tim's presence is no accident. She goes back to the old security footage from his job interview, zooms in on the camera and watches as Matthew walks past one of the cameras and mouths the word, "Hello, Ellie," to it before he exits out of the building. Very interesting. Creepy vibes are ahead because Tim is not the average nice guy he pretends to be. Ellie hires private investigators because she can afford it and uncovers his tragic backstory. His real name is Matthew Ward. His parents divorced about 26 years ago because of Ellie's test. His mother later passed away in their family home where him and his mother lived, and his father suffered a stroke and could no longer talk. Matthew's entire goal in life was to infiltrate her company and pretty much destroy it. And before Ellie could even process this information from her private investigators, Tim walks straight into a corporate office to spill the tea himself anyway. Tim is revealing to Ellie that he has dug up all this dirt on her. So Tim knows that in the past when Ellie was trying to get all her test results done, she took DNA from a lot of people that did not consent. For instance, she took DNA from people that were already buried. She took DNA from people that were almost passing away, criminals, and certainly a lot of non-consenting citizens to build her database and prove this DNA worked. He blames her for destroying his family because, see, when the DNA test came out, Tim's dad found out he was not a match with his mother and decided to leave her because, you know, he wanted to be with the one. His mum was humiliated and lonely and turned to alcohol. In her desperation, she took the DNA test herself and was matched with a truly monstrous and manipulative man who was literally a predator of young women, which is not great. But like I said, just because you match with someone doesn't mean that match is a good person, right? But because she was desperate and lonely, she stuck with him. When he got caught with all his illegal situations, she spent all her money paying his legal fees until she was left with absolutely nothing. And now Tim is here for vengeance. He announces that he hacked her system and completely ruined her DNA test and the algorithm with it. He tells her that he messed up pretty much 2 million matches on her site. So there are 2 million people that have submitted their DNA that got told they were matched with one person and they were not correct, which is why it's going to affect everybody else that took the test and the other 4 stories. And the other person that he manipulated was her. Their test was not real. Tim isn't Ellie's match. He faked the data. He looked her into the eyes and tells her that she was so desperate to be loved, she just convinced herself that an ordinary guy like him was her soulmate. And he's about to expose this whole thing to the entire world, meaning millions of people will realize that they were just brainwashed themselves into loving this complete stranger that was not really a DNA match. Ellie is enraged and she loses her mind. In a fit of pure panic and anger, she grabs a glass decanter that she has in her office and she smashes Tim's head with it and basically unalives him on the spot. The twist gets all twistier because that is not the end of the story. Tim was live streaming the entire confrontation. The whole world just watched the CEO of Match Your DNA admit the science is flawed and she was unethical, and then saw her commit a live broadcast unaliving. Ellie goes to court. She has plenty of money for lawyers to try to get her out of this situation, even though, what she did was live broadcast. They could say that she was extremely manipulated and she was, not of the right mind, etc., etc. But her company has taken a hit and it's definitely not where it used to be. About 1/3 of her staff vanished after they found out about the scandal and saw what she did. On the day of her final verdict at the courts, she tells her assistants that if things don't go her way, basically meaning if the court has found her guilty, the assistant is to press the button to let the world start making its own mistakes again. At the very end of this book, with the final page, it simply just shows when someone clicks on the website, there is an error 404, website not found. She has shut the website all down, meaning I suspect she is now found guilty of her crimes. Now, like I said, the ending of this book completely reconceptualized every other story that we just talked about. Jade and Nick chose to ignore this news. They are happy, they love their partners, and they decide to believe their matches were real. And I want to believe that they continue with a happily ever after. Amy, who was paired with Christopher, the serial killer, uses this news as a coping mechanism, convinces herself that the test was just a glitch and that she didn't actually have a soulmate that was a psychopath. And then you have Mandy. At the end of the day, she says she doesn't care if the test was real or not real. She has her baby boy and that's all that matters to her. So she still continues with a happy ending, which is great. Now, John Mars leaves us with a massive psychological question mark here. If a test like this exists in the world, would you take it? Or would the results just force you to brainwash yourself into thinking that you love someone when you never would have looked at them without the test at all? Here is my final thoughts of the book. Let's talk about the rating for me. This book is an absolute undeniable 5 out of 5 for me. It is a masterclass in high concept psychological suspense. What I love most about how John Mars uses this sci-fi premise is to prove a very grounded point. Human relationships are far too messy, complicated, and beautifully chaotic to even be reduced to a simple lab test, I think. If you like the dark, technology go wrong sort of vibes of Black Mirror, this is exactly that, but in book form. It dives deep into some heavy themes, definitely grief, toxic control, and pure obsession. And the pacing is fast if you don't mind a little bit of a whiplash. Now, tracking 5 different lives sound like a recipe for massive headache, right? But Mars's writing is so sharp and distinct that you never get confused. Instead, he uses these 5 points of view to play absolute mind games with you, which I love. Here is his formula for keeping you basically hooked. Every single short chapter ends in a massive agonizing cliffhanger, but instead of giving you answers, the book forces you to sit through 4 other people's lives first before you get back to the answer of the person that you were just interested in. These other stories are just as messed up and interesting, so you aren't even mad about it though. It's essentially 5 mini novellas, I think, seamlessly woven together into one big giant concept. Addictive web of chaos. You literally cannot put it down because you always want to know what's going to happen next to someone. And that, my friend, is the absolute mind-blowing breakdown of The One by John Mars. Talk about a science experiment gone completely wrong. Note to self, never hand in your DNA over to a corporate tech company, I think is the moral of the story. If you have finished this entire recap, I would love to know your thoughts and put your comments below. If this technology did exist, would you take the test or are you going to be staying away from it? Which couple's twist was the most shocking to you? Was it the serial killer or maybe Nick's heartbreak? And what did you really think of Ellie? Is she a toxic CEO or was she just an ambitious woman that's been, misinterpreted? Drop all your theories and rants below in the comments and I will try to reply to as many as I can. Thank you so much for sticking around for the full insane story. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like and subscribe and turn on that notification bell, as I said earlier, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.